This is Blackstone Joe, and you're listening to Slick Talk.
If I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
There's the stink of oil about him.
Hello and welcome into episode 151 of Slick Talk. I am your host, Blackstone Joe, and I'm glad you're here. You know, some samples end up leaving your analyst with more questions than answers. That was the case after I looked at a generator sample just before I was sitting down to record today's episode. Usually a generator sample ends up being a quick comment to write because there's not much going on for a generator, and as such, they usually don't make a lot of metal, the oil tends to be in good shape, and the comment almost always ends with "things look good here" or something similar to that. So it's a nice sample to stumble upon in most cases for an analyst, and the owner typically shouldn't have a lot of problems to look into. If anything, you mainly want to prioritize finding an oil change interval that isn't too long. And if you're changing the oil on schedule, there's generally not much else to worry about with the generator. So that's what made this particular sample interesting. I want to explain what we found that was unusual and also open the floor up to all of you. Feel free to chime in on the YouTube comment section. You could also reach out via our Instagram, Facebook. You could even email us, bstone@blackstone-labs.com, to chime in with what you think might be the likely scenario for everything that turned up in this sample. And it was quite a stew, starting with a lot of metal content. Aluminum, chrome, iron, copper, lead, and tin. Those are the wear metals we typically find. They all read high compared to what we typically see for this type of engine. Now, with the high metals, there are a couple of factors that we want to take into consideration right off the top, and that is how long the oil was in use and how new the engine is. The owner wasn't sure about the hours on oil, noting it could possibly be the first oil change. But even if this is a first oil change, which could involve break-in metal and normal accumulation from an oil run longer than average, which it could possibly have been, even if that was the case, we still have to be wary of poor wear, and that's due to the fact there were some abnormalities, specifically in markers for contamination. Now, contamination isn't necessarily abnormal since, of course, it can show up when it's right in the neighborhood of the engine and the oil that's in the sump. But what's abnormal in this case is that per the oil information slip, this oil came from a GP 17500E. Now, that jumble of letters and numbers didn't mean a whole lot to me at first because I'm not an encyclopedia for generators, but I can Google with the best of them, and that type of generator has an engine that uses air cooling. Enter potassium and sodium, high levels of which tend to go hand in hand with coolant contamination. Now, some oils use sodium in the additive package, but this level really wasn't typical for additive, and potassium doesn't have a likely source other than glycol-based coolant. That makes me wonder if A, the model may have been written incorrectly on the slip, which, hey, if you're a client that's sampling a lot of different engines, say if you're servicing a fleet or if you have just a lot of units on file as it is, then it's not uncommon to make a typo on the slip. But if there is not a typo on the slip, then I wonder about sample contamination. This is a situation we see fairly regularly, which is owners sampling using, say, the same drain pan across different engines. Maybe they sample one engine that has a problem, and then they dump the oil from another engine that doesn't have a problem, but they sample from the same pan, they mix the two together, and then all of a sudden we see contamination that doesn't belong to the engine that you might think it does. If this is a situation where there is contamination from another engine, let's say, then maybe the high metals do reflect a long oil run and break-in that has accumulated. But if the owner is confident they wrote the model correctly on the slip, then we're left scratching our heads as to where potassium and sodium came from. Yet another left field explanation could be an oil with an added package we're not familiar with. The reason that's hard to pin down is the oil type was blank on the slip. So we're left to speculate on that front as well. Again, more questions than answers. But we are seeing another indicator, at least a likely one, that this oil, at least in part, was from a newer engine because we saw the presence of another element, that being barium. It's not an element that typically reads high in any oil, but when you see even a minor amount, it can be a common marker for a factory fill. So we're still wondering about metals being wear-in related, but potassium and sodium are such a head scratcher that even with the owner noting a model that uses an air-cooled engine design, we have to wonder about where potassium and sodium are coming from. And that's exactly the sort of question I placed in the comment, noting that the presence of these elements is unusual, that they can show coolant, but alluding to the fact that if the model is correctly written on the slip, then coolant wouldn't be an issue. So where they're from would remain a curiosity. Going beyond coolant markers, we also found a low flash point. This is indicative of fuel more than we typically see simply from starting the engine and running it, but if you do sample right after running the engine, then you can introduce fuel from startup. It's just that we don't often find more than 2% of the sample volume from startup alone. And this sample had a little over that based on the flash point, approximately 2.3%. So at the end of the day, we're looking at the first sample from an engine with a lot to cover. High metals, signs of contamination, and with that, it's hard to be sure if this is metal that speaks to wear-in and a long run, or if this could be a situation where there's also excess wear. And we have to wonder, is there confusion about the model on the slip, given that we're seeing signs of coolant in an air-cooled engine? And if the model was correctly written on the slip, maybe there was an issue with sample contamination. And if that's an issue, it could have influenced metals too. We're interested to know what you think, but we also hope that we see a follow-up sample from this particular model, and maybe we learn even more details from the client as to what might have influenced these results on their end. If you've sampled with us before, you probably know that we prefer a sample that's from the drain during the middle of the drain process, because that way you avoid dirt and debris from around the drain plug area, and ideally you don't wait too long and miss the drain altogether. But some folks will sample from a pan either because they started the drain, didn't have the bottle handy, and in most cases sampling from the pan ends up being okay. But you can skew the results even if you're sampling just 2 engines. Keep in mind that 2 engines lead 2 different lives and can have 2 different sets of problems. So avoid sampling from a pan if you can, especially if it's one that is used in the maintenance process for more than 1 engine. We want to know for sure that the oil in the bottle came from the drain from that exact engine that you meant to sample from, and that way we know what problems to assign to it. So at the end of the day, with this particular sample, we are left with more questions than answers. Hopefully we learn what was going on both with the sampling process, and if it was accurate, we can dig a little deeper into why these abnormalities showed up. As always, be sure to fill out your oil information slip, because each and every question we ask helps inform these results and how we can contextualize them and help you take care of what it is you own. Hopefully we learn more on this one, and feel free to let us know what you think is happening, whether there was a typo on the slip, or if you think that there could have been contamination, or maybe you're very familiar with generators and think that Even a slight misprint could have alluded to a different model where it is obviously liquid cooled, and that would speak to this particular problem. Maybe one that's related to fuel, or maybe you know that this particular model can struggle from this issue or the other. Feel free to let us know what you think is going on, and hopefully we learn more on our end too. Just goes to show, you never take anything for granted when it comes to used oil. Whether it's from a generator that's living a quiet life in a garage somewhere, or if it's an aircraft engine that's spending a lot of hours during demanding operation, sometimes results just don't match the expectations. But hopefully, with follow-up and clerical details in place, we can learn more and help you take care of what is you're sampling. Meanwhile, I'll let you know if we see anything else unusual come through the lab. Thanks for hanging out. This is Blackstone Joe, signing off.
The Slick Talk podcast is powered by Blackstone Laboratories. If you're ready to start your oil analysis journey, visit blackstone-labs.com to order your free test kit.